Hello. Hello.
Hello, hi Nikunj, can you hear me?
Hi, Karishma. Good evening. Yes, I can
Hi.
hear you. Can you hear me
Hi.
well?
Yeah, how are you?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
Great, I'm doing good. So Nikunj, we'll start in next 3 to 4 minutes.
Sounds great. Can you see me well also, right? The video and audio
Yes,
are both good.
yeah, I can.
Okay, great. Sounds awesome. So, Karishma, basically, you'll be asking me essentially the questions in a kind of a um, dialogue fashion, right?
Yeah, I'll be asking questions as given and yeah.
Okay, sounds great.
Great. I think Nikunj, let's just start.
Hello. Hello.
I think let's just start.
Sounds great. Let's do it.
Yeah. Thank you all for joining us today and welcome to the webinar Ask Me Anything Career as a Machine Learning Engineer with Nikunj Bajaj. So today before starting the webinar, we'll quickly discuss the agenda. We'll start with brief High Council introduction. Then we'll ask the guest speaker to introduce himself and will be followed by a question and answer session, which is an opportunity for everyone to ask questions from our guest speaker. So before we get started, I just quickly want to introduce you to a few ground rules and information about the structure of the webinar. Today's webinar will follow a question and answer structure. So I will let you ask questions from the guest speaker, Mr. Nikunj Bajaj. You will be on YouTube live throughout the call. And if you want to ask questions, you can always pop up your question in the comment box. You can even share the video and like the video. So before we turn it over to our guest speaker for the question and answer round, we just quickly want to introduce ourselves. Who are we? We are High Council, an online and mobile platform that help job seekers and students to land their dream job by connecting them to the employees who work at their dream company. As I'm sure you all know today, getting coaching from a company insider can dramatically increase your chances, not only to ensure that the job you're aiming is the right fit, but also to land in your that dream job. So stay tuned until the end of the webinar and we'll give you a lot more information about it. Also, we'll be hosting regular free events like this. So please sign up on platform so that we can keep you posted about the upcoming webinars. So if you have any question or time and participation, we would love to know more about your professional background and experience. Over to you, Nikunj.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Karishma. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining this webinar. I really appreciate you all taking the time and giving me a chance to introduce myself in front of all of you. So, as Karishma mentioned, I'm Nikunj Bajaj. I've been working in machine learning currently at Facebook. I guess I'll start my story from my undergrad times. So, I went to a school called Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur, back in India to do my undergrad. Some people here might know it by the name IITs, and I studied instrumentation engineering there. So while doing my undergrad, I did a lot of robotics, embedded system programming, and computer vision. And my thesis itself was in trying to identify facial emotions based on facial expressions. So that's where I got a first stint at machine learning. During undergrad, I also did a couple of internships in Israel and UC Berkeley, where I got to learn a lot more about software development, computer vision, and machine learning in general. Followed by which I came to Berkeley, finished my master's, where I also finished the project that I started during my internship. And that's where I got to learn about building robust systems, fault tolerant systems during my master's. After that, it was my first stint with the industry, where I joined a startup called Reflection, and I was building recommendation systems for e-commerce there. This is where my deep experience with machine learning started, especially in the context of industry. And I spent maybe about 3.5 years at Reflection and eventually grew into leading the machine learning team there. After that, it's been about a year that I'm working for Facebook. So in here, I'm working as in the assistant team, which is essentially the voice assistant. You guys might have heard about a device that we recently launched called Portal. That's the team I'm working in.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for the lovely introduction, Nikunj. And we loved it.
Of course.
So, Nikunj, here comes the question. What is machine learning as per you?
Hmm. So machine learning is basically a science or a technique, not necessarily a science, but a technique with which you empower machines to learn, right? As the word obviously goes. I guess the specifics go because by the fact that usually you try to to make the machines learn a specific task, which happens based on a lot of data, which is related to that task, and you happen to have a goal that you have in mind. And you essentially want the machines to learn that specific task based on the previous experiences that you provide the machine as a data. So if you think about an example, like you can imagine that we want to teach the machine to recognize digits. That's the task that we care about. And the experience that you can provide to the machine is you can give it the letters printed on a paper and or an image of that of the letters and a label data set saying that this letter corresponds to 1, this letter corresponds to 3, and so on and so forth. The idea is that we want the machine to learn to recognize the digits on its own so that when a new image or a new paper is given to the machine, it's able to figure out what digit is it. So the goal is that the machine makes minimal error while being able to predict that more accurately. And that's the learning the machine is getting. So essentially, any technique that involves educating or empowering the machine to learn, probably like humans would do, which is an arguable and debatable topic, whether machine learning actually replicates the way humans learn. But any technique that leads machines to do that is called machine learning to me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for answering, Nikunj. So, how is it different from deep learning and artificial intelligence?
Hmm. Um, so deep learning happens to be a subset of machine learning. Machine learning is basically any technique with which you can help machines to learn, right? Deep learning, on the other hand, is a subset of some machine learning algorithms, which are neural network based. But traditionally, when we talk about neural networks, or when we don't mention the word deep in it, we essentially mean that there is only one hidden layer between input and output. And that's the standard neural network. A specific set of algorithms where you have more than one hidden layers, which makes the neural network itself deep, are called deep neural network architectures. And that's what the entire field which deals with these deep neural network architectures is called deep learning. The reason this has such a special mention in the literature and the industry in general is because deep learning algorithms are really good at getting to learn some of the tasks, and humans don't have to do a lot of work in terms of feature engineering, for example, or trying to find out what are the right features such that the machines can learn very well. It usually works out if you can provide it the raw data set. The machine itself, the algorithm itself, is able to figure out how to perform good at certain tasks, which is why it is very popular. On the other hand, you talked about AI, or artificial intelligence, which I think is a superset. So essentially, artificial intelligence is um, any technique which makes machines intelligent. And that could be based on, like, the machines could learn from data, the machines could learn based on some rules, the machine could learn based from some oracle. We really don't know, we really don't care. The point being, any system that can intelligently perform tasks, um, like or unlike human beings, can be called an artificially intelligent system. On the other hand, machine learning is a technique to make machines learn.
Great. Thank you so much, Nikunj. That was fantastic comparison, I must say. So, my next question is, what is your typical day as a senior machine learning engineer at Facebook?
I guess having good food and hanging out with great people. Uh, Besides that, I also get to build some ML systems in here. So as I mentioned, that I work on the assistant team, and which is basically, we recently launched the assistant device from Facebook. So I specifically work on building models which can understand the users of the assistant better, so that we can build a more useful assistant to people. So what I mean to say is, understanding user preferences, like, do they like to set up an alarm? Do they like to watch action movies? Do they like to listen to some romantic songs or instrumentals or whatever? Like, basically understanding our users as well as possible, so that we can understand their queries and respond to those queries in a very personalized way, with respect to that specific user, right? And so we want to we end up building a lot of models which are targeted towards understanding the user very well. Now, as part of my specific role, besides building model, I also get to write code which takes this model to production, to the actual real product, and think about the engineering related nuances of the model. That if I'm delivering this model to the user, can it respond fast enough to some of the user queries? Will it scale to a billion users that are there on Facebook, and so on and so forth. So my role kind of involves doing some level of modeling work and some level of engineering work, which is exactly why I'm specifically called a machine learning engineer. And I like to distinguish that from, let's say, a data scientist role or a backend engineer role.
Great. Thank you so much, Nikunj, for the answer. So, my next question is, could you please tell us more about the corporate culture at your company? Like, elaborate more about the corporate culture at Facebook?
Hmm. So there are many things about Facebook's culture in general, which are popular on the internet. And personally speaking, since I joined the company, the two things that stood out to me the most are the culture of open communication and the culture of giving ownership to every single employee within the company. Now, let me get a little bit deeper into that. What do I mean by open communication? So open communication to me is basically like, when I join Facebook, I see that everyone is welcomed and encouraged to go around, talk to people. If I have a question for a colleague or a peer, I can just directly go to their desk and ask my question without feeling like I'm bothering them or I'm intruding or disturbing their work. Which makes me feel very comfortable communicating with my with people around. And besides that, if I have a question, let's say for the leadership, I don't know, senior managers, directors, or even the CEO, I am encouraged to question every decision that is made, make sure that I understand and I get the sense of it. If I really disagree with something, I'm encouraged to voice that out that, hey, I think that we may not be going in the right direction. And people engage in a very rational dialogue there. So this kind of a open communication kind of a culture makes you feel belong to the company, which is super important to me. On the other hand, ownership is okay. I'll tell you a thing that when we just joined Facebook, we had a orientation program where on the very first day we were told that this is now your company. Now, the idea behind that statement is they want you to feel as the owner of the company and um, feel good when the company does something great and feel bad and responsible when the company messes up somewhere. Your system goes down, your code breaks something. Or when I say your code, I specifically mean here that not necessarily the line of code that you wrote, but anyone in your amongst your peers who wrote that code. People here just feel as owners that nothing at Facebook, I guess, is anybody else's problem. If something is broken, I would just dive right into it, right into it and fix it. And that again gives you a feeling of belonging, which as I mentioned, is very important.
Great. Thank you so much, Nikunj, for the answer. I must say, it's feeling like it's a very cozy and nice culture at Facebook. And I'm sure all
Good.
our attendees must be now dreaming of Facebook only. So, so we have
Yeah,
a
of course,
question
come join
from
in.
candidate or attendee Nikunj. So here I'll put it to you.
Mhm.
Sure. So, how can a candidate start his or her career in machine learning as a fresher?
Hmm. So breaking into the field. So I'm basically assuming that this is relating to the like finding a career in machine learning, right? Probably as an engineer or a data scientist or something like that.
Yeah, as a fresher.
Okay, got it. So there are different ways where how you can get into machine learning, right? So um, first thing is like basically either you join in a machine learning team or a machine learning company as an engineer and get to learn a lot of things totally in the job. There are some companies um, which invest in your learning capabilities and would rather teach you anything that's needed for the job after you join. There are some other companies which essentially require some level of prior experience with machine learning. That is like you have your fundamentals clear, you know some basic algorithms. They probably don't expect you to be a machine learning expert when you're a fresher, but they do expect some basic knowledge. I don't know, some kind of a coursework or some things like that. Now, if the case one is rather simple, that you essentially, I'm assuming that you would probably be a software engineer, familiar with basic data structures, algorithms, etc. You join a company and learn machine learning there, and that totally works out. On the other hand, if you don't have a necessary experience to begin with, and there is a company that um, requires some level of understanding, then I think preparing machine learning would be preparing by yourself at home would be very useful. The main question boils down to how do you prepare, like how do you do a self-study kind of a thing. So there are multiple options today. First off, there are few programs out there which are like 3 to 4 month crash course kind of a thing, where they teach you applied machine learning. So like how do you take machine learning as a field, as a technique, and then apply it to real world problems. And they teach you the necessary tools associated with it and the basic concepts of machine learning. Now that requires some level of commitment and extra time, which a lot of people might not be able to afford. In which case, there are a lot of materials available online, which I have personally found very useful. Some of the massive open online courses like maybe Andrew Ng's course on Coursera, or some books like Learning from Data, these books could be very useful. And one of the things that I found particularly useful is taking up some real world data sets from, let's say, Kaggle, and um, trying to build some basic models by yourself using some open source tools. So once you do some of these things, and you go for an interview where people are expecting some basic knowledge, I'm pretty sure that they would see the skills that you have gained through these courses and books, and would be more than happy to entertain you, even if you don't have experience building big machine learning systems.
Great. Thank you so much for the answer, Nikunj. I'm sure Vamsi Krishna answers must have been answered now. Thank you, Vamsi Krishna, for posting a question on YouTube and asking for the speaker. Thank you so much. So here comes my next question, Nikunj.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, how to break into machine learning field as in the education background or any certifications that are needed?
Any certifications? So here's the thing, like I particularly okay, so basically there are different levels at which again I can answer this question, right? um, so for some people who already have a formal education in machine learning, right, if you have obtained like a master's or a PhD in machine learning, then like that obviously speaks out that you have spent years understanding the subject. I'm assuming this question is more for people who are not necessarily who don't have any formal education per se, and still want to have some kind of certifications on, let's say, their resumes to land a machine learning job. Um, Honestly, I have seen in my experience that very rarely people care about seeing your certificates that you're obtaining from machine learning courses. Like as an interviewer, I interview a lot of machine learning candidates, and I almost never care whether the candidate has mentioned that they have like 13 different certificates from online courses. What I really do care about is whether when you say that you know machine learning, are you able to answer the questions? Do you really understand the basic concepts? So basically, my suggestion in here is, as opposed to run after particular certificates to land a job, I think it's more important that you genuinely try to learn machine learning as a subject. And for that, some of the things that I listed before, that I mentioned earlier, was could be useful. There could be other resources that you can look up online. Essentially, don't necessarily need to invest a lot of time in getting certificates, but you should invest time in brushing up your fundamentals.
Thank you so much, Nikunj, for the answer. So here comes my next question. What is the best job search strategy for a machine learning position?
Um, so a job search for machine learning to me is no different than any other job search. You essentially need two things. One is some level of expertise in the subject, and the second is some contacts where where you who could connect you with the appropriate job openings, because you as an individual cannot know all the jobs that are open and might be relevant. So the first part we already discussed in, I guess, Vamshi's question and a couple other questions before. The second part is probably the more important when it comes to job search. So essentially, I would imagine that you want to put the word out that you are looking for a machine learning job. Now, what does it mean by putting the word out? That obviously you go tell your friends that, hey, I don't know, I'm graduating or I'm looking for a new job and I want to get into the field of machine learning, so that your friends who might be working at some companies or just know some managers or their peers, etc., they could refer you that, hey, one of my friends is looking for a job. You also potentially want to go on LinkedIn and specifically call out that I'm actively looking for a job search, because that would also help to increase the breadth of your um, network and let people know that you are interested in looking for a job. So I think once you put enough word out and you can communicate that what is specifically that you're looking for, you would potentially have a lot of people getting in touch with you, and you do the interviews. I'm assuming that you are actually preparing for machine learning positions. So with these two things, you would end up in a good position, I would say. And honestly, it's really not no different than uh, searching job in any other field, be it HR or software engineering or data science or whatever.
Great. Thank you so much. Fantastic. So, Nikunj, what do you think are the three tips to make your resume stand out for a machine learning position?
Hmm. Um, so this question is also very similar to me. This question is very similar to the previous question that I answered, and I don't have three tips to make your resume stand out for a machine learning position. I have only one tip. That one tip is, don't do things to have a shining resume. Just do your work or your preparation properly. So if you are writing code, let's say even in a non-ML type of position, right? Do it properly with a genuine interest of building a great system. If you're managing a project with less individual technical contribution, make sure you are doing that job right. And if you're taking ML courses, make sure you do it to understand and learn ML, and not show any certifications in your resume. It's simply because when you do things with a sole purpose of putting things on your resume or making your resume stand out, you end up doing a superficial job at it. And people are very easily able to catch that in interviews. I have been an interviewer myself. I have seen a lot of experienced people. And the major complaint that leads to candidate rejections is, hey, they're not able to back that, support that with their answers. Like when I try to dig deeper into it, they fail miserably. And that's the thing I want people to understand, that um, you should not be doing things to just make your resume look good, because it very easily is, people are able to detect that very easily. Instead, even if you don't have very good machine learning experience, but let's say you have been a phenomenal software engineer, for example, just just do that job properly. Write that in detail on your resume, and tell your interviewer that I learned software engineering, having started from XYZ and position, and now I am interested in learning machine learning. And there will be a lot of companies who would value that kind of honesty and give you a chance to come in here and learn machine learning and contribute there. I think that usually works out as a better strategy long term for the candidate themselves and the companies as well. And trust me, I do not mean to get philosophical here. I think it's a very practical advice, because as I mentioned, more likely than not, a candidate is not rejected because their resume was not good enough, but the fact that they were not able to back their resume. That's more often than not is the more reason.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nikunj. So, Nikunj, what do you think are the three key skills, important skills required in a machine learning engineer?
Hmm. So As an individual contributor, I have found myself, okay, if I want to break down a machine learning problem, right, I think the first challenge that a machine learning problem poses is how do you even formulate a particular problem? And being able to formulate the problem properly is one of the key ways to solving a machine learning, is one of the key steps to solve a machine learning problem. Now, why does formulation become such an important step in ML particularly? Because machine learning has different paradigms with which you can solve certain problems. Like you can either go with supervised learning, unsupervised learning, reinforcement learning. There are different techniques with which you can in which you can formulate a problem, and each of these paradigms work well with certain kind of problems. Now, once you have identified that I want to go with a certain technique, then even then you want to further formulate it as a, let's say, a classification problem or a regression problem or a ranking problem. There are different ways you can formulate that problem, and how you formulate is a key to your success in the problem. So, which is a skill that comes with a lot of experience. So, I guess to give you an example, like one of the problems that we discussed earlier, which was ranking the digits in an image, right? Or not, sorry, understanding what digit is in a particular image. Um, you would probably formulate that problem as a classification problem, because the digits could be from 0 through 9. So there are like 10 different buckets in which your image can fall into. So essentially, you want to classify that image in one of these 10 categories. And the approach that we talked about earlier falls into the realm of supervised learning, where you have a few images and a few label data set that you have provided your algorithm to begin with. So problem formulation, I would say, is one of the key skills in solving a machine learning problem. The second thing that I think becomes very important is your understanding with different algorithms, like understanding of different algorithms. Like, do you understand trees very well? Do you understand logistic regression? Do you understand different deep neural networks? Because again, some of these algorithms are better suited for certain kind of problems. And even when you have chosen a particular algorithm, do you understand the nitty-gritties of it enough that you can tune um, the model to suit best with your particular problem? And that kind of a thing can never happen until you have a reasonably good understanding of these algorithms. So I think just knowing your fundamentals and theory of the algorithms is the second most important skill. Last but not the least, you should be able to write code yourself that can take your understanding of machine learning, your excellent problem formulation to real working solutions. Because um, if you're not able to code, you can think and have a very good intuition about the problem, but you will never succeed as a machine learning engineer, because people usually like to have people who can write code and experiment and deliver things end to end, as opposed to someone who has a lot of ideas but are not really able to do some productive work out of it. So I guess problem formulation, theoretical understanding, and implementation, these are probably the three most important skills that it takes to solve a machine learning problem end to end.
Fantastic, Nikunj. Thank you so much for the answer. So, Nikunj, we have few questions from the attendees. Meanwhile, I think we should just give a look at that. So,
Sure.
I would like to thank you, Marco, for asking the questions. Marco, I would like to say we are asking your questions from Nikunj in between. We already have that in our list, and a few of your questions will be asked further. Few have been answered by him, and few will be asked further. So if you feel at the end of the webinar that your questions are still not asked, I would request you to post it again. Great. So next one is Mohit Ashok. Mohit. So Mohit has a question for you, Nikunj. Mohit says, is there any some blog that you follow that helps you to get an idea of the recent developments in the field of data science?
So I basically I'm particularly interested in a lot of ML engineering techniques, and for which I follow blogs from most of the big companies that are doing a lot of AI research, including Google, LinkedIn, Facebook, of course. And besides that, what I end up doing is there are certain when I'm solving certain problems, I go read a lot of associated papers, which gives me an insight into um, some of the more cutting edge work. And you, from there on, what I end up doing is I end up reading a lot of papers which are in the reference sections of the main paper that I'm reading, which also gives me a breadth of knowledge. So essentially, for depth, I would obviously go deep into a particular paper that I'm reading, but that also gives me a good breadth because I go through the reference and read out some of the associated papers. So that's my typical way of keeping myself up to date with the recent advancements.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Nikunj. Mohit, I'm sure your question must have been answered. And thank you, Mohit, for asking a question. So another question we have from Praharshit. Yeah, Praharshit. So Praharshit is asking that how important is maths for machine learning and how often do you have to use maths as part of your daily job? I'm sure he dislikes maths or he likes maths.
Yeah.
So he's asking it with different math
So
subject.
that's a great question. So basically, to me, the field of math that becomes very important in machine learning is essentially linear algebra. Um, a lot of machine learning is basically dependent on how you operate on matrices, because most of the algorithms are optimized based on matrix manipulations. And for that, I have seen that my linear algebra courses from undergrad come in very handy. Besides that, if you are also familiar with a bunch of optimization techniques that come in handy, and obviously some level of um, differential calculus is also useful because you end up using a bunch of differentiation in your ML algorithms. Now, that said, um, today, even if you don't have a solid foundation in all the three things that I mentioned, but you have a very good intuitive understanding of the algorithms, and you are able to fill in the blocks in your head with about some of the mathematical equations, with all the tools and technologies that are the support available from the community, you can still get past reasonably in most situations without having a very deep understanding of these mathematical tools. If you know these, they would certainly help you in a more solid foundation. But if you don't know this, that's not a deal breaker, according to me. You still obviously have to understand ML algorithms and the tools around that, but you can get past that without knowing all the detailed technical maths.
Wow, wonderful. Thank you so much, Nikunj. So, next question is what is the interview format of a machine learning role?
Hmm. So I would say the interview format really depends from company to company. There are a lot of companies that give you a take home exam where they have probably one of the representative problems that they're solving in house and formulated as a more contained problem that you can take home and take like a few hours to do the entire data analysis and come up with an end to end solution of the problem. There are other companies which test you like with different concepts in different interviews. For example, there would usually be a theoretical interview about machine learning where people would test your fundamentals and do you understand the algorithms reasonably well, do you understand some of the metrics reasonably well, and so on and so forth. There would more likely than not, there would be an interview where people test your coding skills and your familiarity with some of the tools like pandas or scipy or scikit-learn and things like that. There are multiple libraries out there, and are you familiar with those libraries? Now, depending on your seniority level and um, your specific role that the company is hiring you for, you might also have a machine learning design or an infra interview where you are asked to like you're given a very abstract problem that how would you, for example, detect credit card frauds, and then you come up with how would you formulate that as a machine learning problem, what kind of data would you collect, what kind of features would you use, what kind of algorithms would you use. And not just that, it also goes beyond uh, where would you store certain kind of data sets, how frequently would you have to invoke your model, and so on and so forth. So like design and engineering aspects of that scenario that you're being discussed. So I think those are a few commonly used evaluation techniques in a machine learning interview.
Thank you so much, Nikunj, for the answer. So, Nikunj, we have another question from our speaker, or our attendees, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
So, asking, is there a way to get better at problem formulation? He finds more.
Pardon me, Karishma, I was not able to hear you at all. I think your voice was breaking, so I could not get the question at all.
No problem. No problem. I'll just repeat it. Mohit is asking, is there a way to get better at problem foundation? He finds most of the, I don't know what is this term called, MOOCs,
Yeah,
lack
MOOCs,
that
which is
aspect.
massive open
Yeah,
online courses.
yeah, it lack that aspect. So, any better way to get better at problem foundation? Formulation, I'm sorry,
Uh,
problem formulation.
and what was the context about MOOCs again? Sorry, I missed that part of the question.
No problem. He's saying, is there a way to get better at problem formulation?
Okay. Um, I think this is a skill that really comes with practice. So I think the probably I would change the question to how can I practice more of machine learning problems. Now, obviously, like you can, besides practicing things yourself, you can go ahead and read a lot of blogs, as I mentioned earlier, because I get to learn a lot from the way people have solved machine learning problems themselves, and getting to read for blogs from some of the startups who are doing deep technical work in ML, or some of the big companies. You get to see that, okay, this was the problem that they were trying to solve, and this is the approach that they took. They would obviously tell you at some level that how are they formulating the problem. But I do think that reading alone is not sufficient to get past, to, like, become an expert yourself in formulating problems. You have to get your hands dirty at it. And a very good way that I've found myself, um, use a lot, is basically taking up online data sets from Kaggle, or even participating in competitions if you have relatively more bandwidth. That really helps. Just take any data set, try to formulate it as a machine learning problem, use some of the existing tools to solve the problem end to end, and that will give you a lot more clarity. And once you do that, you can go ahead and check the techniques that other people have used, because usually there are also a lot of blogs from masters at Kaggle, who would tell you that, hey, this was the approach they took, and then you can compare yours against theirs and see how, how can you learn and improve better.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Nikunj, for the answer. Thank you, Mohit, for asking the question again. I'm sure your question must have been answered. And Vamsi Krishna, your question regarding statistics, Nikunj already answered before with more with Praharshit's questions as maths. How does it matter? So thank you, attendees, for asking the question. So my next question for you, Nikunj, is what is the career path of a machine learning engineer?
Um, So again, this is probably another question where I think it's not necessarily very different from other technical roles. Just like any other technical role, you can, as a machine learning engineer, you can choose to go one of the two paths. One is as an individual contributor, where once you grow in your career, you start solving basically bigger problems, or more abstract problems, which are related to machine learning. So for example, like when you just join a company, you might be given that, hey, there is a model which is working, can you try to tweak some parameters such that the accuracy of the model increases? That's a level of problem that you're solving. And once you keep growing, you might be like, hey, we want to solve like the credit card problem, try to come up with an approach. And once you grow further in your career, you might be like, you want to identify what are the future, what are the problems that can appear 5 years down the line, and you want to solve that problem yourself. So this is one path where you can grow as a individual contributor role. The other path is a managerial role where you um, probably go a little bit higher than implementing things yourself, but you want to empower other machine learning engineers and data scientists, like a team of ML engineers and data scientists, to solve the technical issues, while you take the role of more mentorship and guidance, and their and improving their careers, um, while of course achieving the bigger objective of the problems that are being solved. So I think it's pretty similar to any other technical role.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Nikunj. Great. So my next question is, what are the four challenges do you often face in your job as a machine learning engineer?
Hmm. So at least one challenge is obvious to me, which is data. So as any other machine learning engineer would resonate with it, I think one of the biggest problem with um, ML engineering problem is having access to label data set all the time, because a lot of times when we formulate problems that we want to drive certain metrics, like, I don't know, revenues or click-through rates, etc., we don't necessarily have explicitly labeled data set by the user. Sometimes we do have access to implicit data set, in which case we don't necessarily know whether some of the implicit signals can be treated as a positive label or a negative label. So having access to that data set becomes challenging. The typical techniques that companies end up using is, if they don't have organic label data set, they want to hire people to sit down and label data set for them, but that process gets exorbitantly expensive. I guess the other thing that I can think of is basically um, defining the success criteria of the problem, because a lot of times your success criteria is the end goal of your machine learning problem that you're solving is, let's say, increasing conversion rates for an Amazon like problem, like are you able to make people buy more? But getting that kind of a signal can take a long time to get feedback if your model is doing good or not. Plus also has a lot of revenue impact directly if your model was doing bad. So you want to learn faster, except when you come up with these offline metrics where you can tune those offline metrics to get better at solving certain problem, you don't necessarily know if that offline metric will correlate well with your end goal. So defining the real success criteria and iterating fast on top of that becomes another issue. What else you asked? So one of the other problems, which is a little bit more technical in nature, is designing systems and separating between, let's say, the offline components of the system and online component of the system. So what I mean to say is there are some of the batch job kind of a thing that you can do offline training. And there are some things that you want to do when the user comes online or makes a real request. Now, the trade-off between the two is when you do things offline, you are able to, in the real time, you're able to do things a lot faster because you have all the computations done. Except what you lose out on is the more recency or the more up-to-date information, because you have processed some things a few hours before. So making that trade-off becomes becomes challenging, that what kind of systems you want to process online versus offline. Last, um, it also becomes challenging, especially, and I think this is specifically true for the field of machine learning. That is, where do you draw the line between research and product utility? So a lot of times people get carried away when they're solving machine learning problems to do a little bit better because it's so objective. Like you have a model and you have an accuracy of what, 95%. Because it's so objective, people get into the researchy mode of making that 95 to 96%, 96 to 97%, and so on and so forth. And the incremental progress that you are making from 95 to 96, you might have to invest days and weeks of human effort to to get that kind of a jump in accuracy. But from a product perspective, the company might not even care as much about that level of difference. So as a machine learning engineer, you really need to be conscious of your time and make sure that you are able to make that trade-off easily.
Great. Thank you so much, Nikunj. So, Nikunj, what is the most interesting project that you have undertaken as a machine learning engineer?
I'm not allowed to talk about that. So
Okay.
the most interesting project that I think I have done in my career in machine learning is the project that I'm doing now, and it's still um, um under the covers. So I cannot talk about that. But to honor the question, I would, I guess, talk about the second most
No
interesting problem
problem.
that I've worked so far. Um, so in basically, I was in my last job, I was building this thing called um, uh, a support for machine learning throughout the company. Like different teams are building ML solutions, and we wanted to build a centralized AI platform where we can support all the machine learning work in the company under one umbrella. And that obviously requires you to think, solve essentially all the problems that I mentioned earlier, which is like, understanding what are some components could be online, which components could be offline, how do you train models, how do you write data pipelines, and implement some of the models yourself so that that can be used directly as a library from like with other teams, by other teams in the company. So building that kind of a centralized platform from ground up was very interesting to me, because it really gave me insights into machine learning models, but also the engineering around it. That what does it take to build a full-fledged ML system for while the company is still moving and while the products are still being used by real customers. And how do you move that that kind of a moving product to a centralized platform? I think I found that problem very interesting.
Thank you so much, Nikunj. That's fantastic. So, Nikunj, we have better to get work experience or else does masters
Karishma,
make
sorry,
much?
but I again missed your voice. I think your voice was breaking in, so could not get the question.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about it. I'll repeat it. Vamsi Krishna says, is it better to get work experience or else does masters make much difference?
Hmm. That that to me is um, so it really depends. Like basically, by the way, that's a great question, and I don't think I have a very explicitly obvious answer to that question. I don't really know which one would make difference as to make your career successful. Um, what I can think of is it depends. It would depend on the kind of masters you are doing versus the kind of the job that you're doing, and maybe that's why it's a difficult question to answer straight away as a blanket solution to that answer. Because I'll tell you why. I'll tell you my experience that when I did my masters, I got to work at very open-ended problems. So like hey, this is the problem that we want to solve, and try to like see what kind of approaches you can take. And the thing that I got out of my masters was, how can you take a very vague problem, come up with reasonably interesting solutions, and then iterate on top of it to make it a working solution. So more than any specific experience in machine learning that I got out of that process, I think that thinking capability was I got out of my masters, and it became super useful for me. And that I think I have that kind of a skill I ended up using very frequently in my job, and that experience was very useful to me. Besides that, some of the courses that I took in a more official setting where I'm doing assignments and like taking exams, and that made a lot of my fundamentals very clear when during the masters. However, in a job, you probably won't have enough time to go into details about the different subjects that you are taking. So you may lose out on that. But you, depending on the job that you're doing, you may have even a higher degree of exposure to the first thing that I got out of my master's, which is you are given an abstract problem and you want to go ahead and come up with interesting solutions, because the iteration cycle in a job might be faster. So it really weighs down on like you have to really weigh down where are you going for your master, what kind of courses are you taking, versus where are you doing a job and what kind of projects are you doing there. So I can't give a better answer to this question, I guess.
Thank you so much, Nikunj, for the answer. And sure, Vamsi Krishna, your question must have been answered great. And thank you so much for asking, Vamsi Krishna. So here comes my last question, Nikunj. What advice do you have for aspiring candidates to be successful in machine learning role?
um, Prepare well, read well, understand well. I think my advice essentially goes the back to the initial thing that I mentioned, which is your intent matters. And if your intent is actually learning machine learning, then just go dive right into it, solve ML problems, and read machine learning books and attend machine learning courses. And just have that objective in your head, right? That you just want to be good at the subject, and not necessarily go after making your resume better or appearing smarter in front of people. If you are doing things right, your smartness will not be hidden. And if you are doing things from the wrong motive, it will become obvious. Maybe you will find a job by doing things with an objective of just finding a job, but it won't take too long in your job for you and for your peers to realize that uh, you essentially your heart is not in the right place. So I would just say that keep your heart in the right place and do your job right, and that's all it will take you to be successful either in machine learning or other career streams as well.